Let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to be talking about transforming your app stack into an efficient, cohesive, and cost-effective system. Hope you're ready for that. We're thrilled to have you here as we dive into strategies and insights that will help you optimize your technology choices, streamline your workflows, and ultimately deliver better outcomes for your teams and clients. So before we get started, let's take a moment to thank you for joining us. Whether you're here live or watching the recording later, we're excited to have you as part of the conversation. Of course, no webinar is complete without a few housekeeping rules. So to ensure the best experience for everyone, whenever I say this, I feel like a flight attendant reminding everyone to buckle their seatbelts and find their nearest exit. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentation to minimize background noise. If you have questions during the session, please drop them into the Q&A box or chat window. We'll address them during a dedicated Q&A session toward the end. If you have technical issues, please feel free to drop those in as well, and I'll do my best to help address those as we're going. A recording of the webinar and any supporting resources will be shared after the session, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. You can come back and check in with us with the webinar anytime. Just sit back, listen, and engage. So a quick look at what we'll be talking about today. The problem first, we'll talk about the problem with most app stacks, kind of the common challenges that firms face with their app stacks and why so many struggle to get the most out of their technology. Then we'll talk about building a strategic framework, what types of actionable steps you can take to create a purposeful and efficient app stack tailored to your firm's specific needs. Evaluating and integrating tools, so how to create a checklist to evaluate apps, ensure they align with your goals, and integrate seamlessly into your current workflows. And then, of course, staying current without disruption. We know work still has to get done. So how do we stay updated with the latest tech trends without creating disruptions to internal teams and clients? And then, of course, at the end, we'll go through those Q&As, and you'll be able to ask your questions directly of our expert today, Dayle Rodriguez, who is a systems advisory manager at Kreston Reeves. Before we get started with Dayle, we have a quick poll question to start with. And our poll is, oops. How would you describe the current state of your app stack? So we're not really going to use the poll functionality today. So just drop that in the chat box. And while we're doing that, today we have Dayle with us, who I've been delighted to catch up with for a few minutes before we came online. Dayle is a seasoned systems advisory manager at Kreston Reeves. He specializes in helping accounting firms optimize their technology for maximum efficiency and impact. And he's going to guide us through today's session and share his expert insights into building and maintaining a better app stack. I'm super excited about this because, as we were just talking about, my background, of course, is in marketing. So I've done this on the marketing side, but the accounting world is new and honestly sometimes a little intimidating. So I think there's a lot of great things to learn here. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, and we'll turn off the screen share here.
I have to say your intro was amazing, by the way. The alliteration on some of those things, I would have tripped up entirely. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Many years of tongue twisters, I suppose. All right, so Daryl, let's start by talking about the core challenge that many firms face, the inefficiencies and frustrations caused by fragmented, poorly designed app stacks. For many, these systems have grown organically without a really clear strategy. I think that's something we see in a lot of segments of business. They end up with unnecessary costs, disjointed tools, and then, of course, missed opportunities for integration. So then they're passing data manually and things like that. We really want to dive into why this happens and what the impact has on productivity and client service. So first of all, in your experience, what are the most common signs that an app stack is holding a firm back?
When you see a lot of manual processes. Now, I'm personally not against spreadsheets. I think they're a great tool. Excel is a wonderful tool. But if you've got lots of systems or lots of people having to use a spreadsheet to get information from one place to another, and that happens more often than not, that is a sign that a firm or practices systems are a little bit clunky and could do with some cleanup. That's
Awesome.
definitely one of the biggest ones.
Yeah. Are there any other signs that come to mind, or is Excel one of the biggest ones?
I'd say Excel. I would say also size of firm. I'd say certain firm sizes have limitations in the software they can use, because accounting, bookkeeping is quite niche in terms of the software they need and what they record and how they record information. And there hasn't been much innovation at the top or higher level dealing to bigger firms. Not insulting any vendors, don't want to do that. But yeah, it's somewhat stagnated, and just by the nature of a larger business, there isn't as much software to use or implement.
Fascinating. So do you think that contributes to why so many firms end up with fragmented app stacks, or is it a strategic problem? How do you see that?
That's a really good question. Is it a street problem? I mean, like I guess following on from what you've just said, not what you've asked, it's also there's a whole change management piece in there. Like the rate at which fintech has evolved in the last 10 years is beyond exponential. It's been insane, right? And you've got people who joined firms 10, 15 years ago whose job description was this and their day-to-day was XYZ. And in the last 10 years, that XYZ has changed drastically. So there's a whole change management piece where, some people, some staff had a set career. They're very good at data entry, very good at analysis using their eyes. And certain systems like Xero, QuickBooks, Sage, they've taken some of that away because of AI. It doesn't have to be done by a person anymore. So you've got people who may be fearful for their jobs or not understanding how their role changes. That's one of the biggest elements in terms of actually changing internal processes. Again, it's just people. We all, to some extent, will resist change. Even me, as someone who likes to be innovative, ahead of the curve, all that kind of stuff. Even I get told to do something, I'm like, I want to do that. Initially by default. So it's usually a people thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I've seen a lot of situations where when new people come into the organization, they can bring in kind of usher those eras of change, but there can still be a lot of resistance to it as well. So, given those challenges of the types of software available, the human aspect, people being somewhat resistant to change, um, what's kind of the first step you think that firms should take to begin addressing inefficiencies and starting to move toward a more efficient app stack?
I would say hire an external consultant. If you're a larger firm and you can afford that, actually have someone who's maybe not well versed in your business in terms of they've been in the business for a long time, who can actually give you like an objective opinion on like, hey, look, I know you're a specialist service, accounting, bookkeeping, but this is how the rest of the world is doing things, and there's no reason for you not to be doing it this way. I get you've got specialist needs, so having a third party consultant come in, and actually doing a review of systems and processes. And so the reason why I'm saying this based on larger firms is one, I work for a larger firm, and two, I've noticed that a lot of younger or newer firms or smaller firms can change more quickly because again, as I mentioned before, there's more resource or more technology available to implement, and they can turn and change quicker. And also asking people what's in it for them. Often when I do this for clients, I'll get approached by a senior manager or a business owner and they want some stats, or they want some strategy stats. They want to know their cash flow. They want to know various things about their business so they can make informed choices. And they will go, "Yep, I want this system because it does crazy good reports. Fantastic." What they forget sometimes is the people having to put the data in to get those reports. If they are not on board, that data is not getting in there. So I know it's a cliche, but getting buy-in at everybody, and if someone from senior management is driving this change, make sure they understand what everyone gets out of it. I often ask people, whether you are a new starter in a junior position or the CEO of the business, what do you want out of the system? Um, and then make sure it's either in there or it gets rid of a problem in their old system. Because if people don't see the benefit of doing it or it doesn't help them in their day to day, or they see the change as a threat, they're really going to resist it. And you can't get over that until people think what you're doing is helpful.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you see times when change actually, we talked about the example when the people are brought in from the top. Um, are there times that the change is instigated from inside the organization, from kind of the more boots on the ground type people, that they see the problems and they bring those up? Or is it more typically the senior management wants the increased productivity or they want the increased insights?
I'm fortunate enough to have experienced both. So I've got some senior leaders in Kreston Reeves who really want to change and make things more efficient, and they see the way the market's going. And I work with some people who are younger than me or newer to the industry, and I think they come in and they're a generation slightly younger than me. I'm in my mid-30s, and they're used to instant things, and they go, why isn't this the way it work? So yeah, I've seen it both ways, and I think when those things meet in the middle, that's when you get like proper change.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely makes sense. So now we know kind of how people can identify that their app stack stinks, as our webinar promised, that we're starting to see some of those things. So let's talk a little bit about like how we move from this like disjointed, people have different systems, they're disconnected, they're using spreadsheets, the resistance to change. And how, like, what key factors should firms consider when they're developing a strategic framework for their app stack?
So two things I kind of go on about is change fatigue, so making sure we're not changing everything one or 2 years. People can't keep up with that, especially the larger the organization, the less time you have to adapt to change. And two is people may have read this in some of my posts on LinkedIn. It's how do you define best? Because best can be both subjective and objective, um, without being too pedantic about language. But like if we say who's the best runner in the world, who's the best sprinter, we'll all say Usain Bolt, right? Dude's fastest on the planet, bar none. But if you say what's the best software for an accounting firm to use, well, it depends how big the accounting firm is. Depends on if they do audit, if they don't. It depends on if they do VAT or specialize in that. It depends if they have clients that work in software. It depends if they've got clients who work in manufacturing. So there's defining best for that business is
Right.
the key thing. I often go on a very basic formula called need times execution. So on a scale of 1 to 5, need, how needed is the feature in the software that you need? So 1 is like it's a nice to have, 5 is a must have. And on a scale of 0 to 10, how well does that software provide the need? If it's a 0, that software doesn't have it in it. And if it's a 10, it does it outstandingly. It's not a foolproof system. There is some subjectivity involved in it. It depends on who does the testing and how many people you have doing the testing. But it's just a way just to make it, make it more subjective, not objective. Sorry, um, when doing that. And I think some of the fears people have around change management in firms is they think it's going to have to be like a massive project. And there are different ways of phasing projects, right? You can do like a whole big bang thing where literally you spend days, weeks, months planning everything and then turning everything on in one go, high risk, high reward. Or you can actually phase things. So you can go, okay, look, I know that I've got a problem with my software. It's costing me however many thousands of pounds per month, per year, and it's leaking us money. And I can change the whole thing in one go, or I can change 2 or 3 smaller things that aren't the massive wins, but they'll help people on the day to day, and it might give us an extra half an hour per week per staff member, which doesn't sound like a lot, but even with 10 people, half an hour per week per staff member, that adds up to time or efficiencies, and that could be one small change.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it feels like, obviously depending on the organization, that would also help warm people up to change. They have those minor milestones of success. And they start to feel good. They start to see those improvements. And then when you need to do the larger improvements, oh, I've already seen that.
Yeah.
I was able to get up a half hour earlier. So now when I need to take that half hour and do a 20-minute yoga class, I already have the success of getting up. Now I can incorporate the next new thing that might be marginally harder. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Do you have a specific example that you're able to share with us about where a well thought out strategy transformed like a firm's efficiency or client services?
Yeah. So when I first joined KR, we had a slightly mismatched approach to apps. For example, at one point we had 3 different OCR vendors across 7 different offices, and it meant we couldn't necessarily do joined up working, right? Because you know someone in the London office who's familiar with HubDoc and someone in Brighton who's familiar with Dext, and although the concepts are the same, if you're not used to clicking certain buttons or how things process, it takes time. So one of the things we did was we're like, okay, we're going to put a process in place where we do 2 year software reviews, hard reviews and soft reviews. So hard review is we go to market, and we literally ask the vendor, look, we're looking to maybe have a partnership with you for at least 2 or 3 years. We do thorough testing, like we'll ask from senior management to juniors, like what do you need from this process, and we'll take a month or two and actually do the relevant testing. So that's one thing we kind of put in place. Every 2 to 3 years, we'll kind of go to tender and look. Dispersed between those 2 or 3 years are what we call soft reviews every 3 to 6 months. Different members of our team, so our Digital Heroes team internally, will look at softwares and apps, not necessarily to change, but just to keep their finger on the pulse, or just to be aware of updates. And that's a process that we've kind of implemented, which helps us just kind of stay on top of things internally and helps us advise clients as well, because we know what's happening. So that's something we've definitely done.
Yeah. Did you say that it was your Digital Heroes team?
Yes, Digital Heroes team.
I
It can never be one person. It can't be. It's physically
Right.
impossible.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
there's
I
too
just
many apps. I wish I knew all the apps. I can't know all the apps. And the crazy thing is, like, you can look at SME type apps. Like if you look at the Zero App Store, right? Some 800, 900 apps on there.
yeah.
And that's not including things like NetSuite and SAP and Dynamics and iPlicit and all these kind of like bigger systems. No one knows it all. And if they claim they know it all, I call shenanigans. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, just talk about your digital heroes for a second. Are they all members of kind of the like an IT like digital team, or are they like embedded in other areas of the organization, but they have a specific interest in this, and so they focus on that. So they have kind of an expertise in that space.
So at the moment, they're a part of our accounts and bookkeeping team. So our accounts teams tend to deal with clients who are under, the audit threshold, maybe a little bit bigger, but not massive companies. And again, bookkeeping. Uh, they are all in that department, and they are people who are accountants and bookkeepers who put their hands up and said, look, we're interested in fintech. We know it's going to help us do our jobs. We're not afraid of it, and we're willing to look at it. So, for example, they'll come with me to Accountex or DAS. We'll split up assignments. We'll look at different softwares, whether that's something completely new that's happened, been released that year, or just keep right, like I said before, keep my finger on the pulse. Because again, I'm only one person. I can't go to DAS and speak to every person on every stand.
Right.
So it's good to kind of spread that load, and also some of them handle vendor relationships as well. So it's not just me. And again, the reason for that as well is to stop internal bias. If a vendor comes to me and buys me lots of drinks and lots of dinner, I might sign with them. I'm not going to lie, I'm only human. But if there's a team of us, then it's not just my opinion. It's the opinion of everyone else as a collective.
Right. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense too, because having the people within those teams, they also know what their counterparts are struggling with, the people that they're sitting next to day in and day out. They hear the grumbles through the
Hmm.
cubicle walls of what's working and what's not working. So they can also bring up those ideas and bring those to the table. Well, I hope at DAS you'll come by the inventory
Most
booth.
definitely. I
Um,
mean, I'm not gonna lie. I feel somewhat threatened by App Venture. You guys kind of do my job for me, right? Like literally, it's does this app do what I need to do, and you kind of score them together. I'm like, okay, I might need a new career.
no, no, actually,
I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
we could talk about inventory another time, but our goal is to make your job easier and help you expand your expertise, and bring that more to the forefront. Um, so just kind of going back to this kind of framework thing, once a firm has identified like those goals and needs, whether that's from the top down or coming up from the people who are actually working with the apps. We talked a little bit about this, but are there any with the reviews, but are there other steps that they should be taking to ensure that those app choices when they're doing those reviews align with the long-term strategy and this isn't just a short-term fix?
That was a really good question. What's just I'm just going to repeat to make sure I understood it. So, when you're doing app reviews, making sure it's a part of the firm's long-term strategy,
Yeah.
is that correct? Okay. Another thing obvious is budget. All right. Let's be honest. You can spend a ton of money and time looking into the various apps, and that's resource. Or you can buy the most expensive app, but it might not be within your budget. So that's always a factor. I'm not going to lie. I think everyone sounds like common sense, but it's true. How long do you actually spend reviewing everything? Because you can review things to the nth degree, and in 2 years' time, still not have a selection. Um, Making sure the right stakeholders in place as well. That's really important. Again, too many cooks in the kitchen spoils the broth, and that's happened to me a few times. I've had too many people kind of chipping in at ideas and plans to go forward. I would also make sure that the apps you're looking at tie into your business growth. So if you, for example, are building an ideal client profile for your firm, like say you specialize in manufacturing or trade construction, you should probably have a good understanding of the trade and construction apps that are available, because those are the apps that you kind of get your clients to use as well. Whether that's something like Next Minute or Figured for agriculture or ServiceMate, wherever it is, like you should kind of know. And often clients ask about what apps do you recommend because they trust their accountants.
Yes,
And if you can get your clients using these apps, I'm not gonna lie, it saves you a lot of time and it makes you a lot more money because the clients are generally putting the data in the right format in the right way, and you get more work done, or better, mm, more high value work for clients. That's a better way of putting it.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So how can firms strike the right balance between adopting innovative tools and maintaining stability within their existing workflows? I imagine like when you see some of those youngsters come in, or like you see the exciting new things on the market, things like that. Like sometimes there's a drive to like, I have to have the newest, coolest tools. We all need the new iPhone, right? Versus like these are the stable things. They've been around forever. They do their jobs. How do you strike that balance?
I'm the wrong person to ask. I have magpie syndrome like crazy. I see something new, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. But no, again, it goes back to like the question you asked me previously is like, does everyone understand the goal of the firm? Because let me go, fintech is amazing and it's really helpful, but it's not actually the core of what we do. So it's a case of like, what is the core of the business? How are we driving that business, and how does that app or product or new shiny thing help that? And if it helps 2 or 3%, that might be a nice to have. If it helps 50%, let's go for it. Um, I would say make sure you've got people who are around you to give a seasoned review. So kind of add balances and checks. That's always really, really important. Um, to stop the magpieing, that's a pretty good question. I think you also have to give the Apple product you're testing or reviewing a decent amount of time. So I would say like a good 2 to 3 months minimum of testing, and I mean hands-on testing. Like I've noticed that some other practices don't do sandbox testing if they can, right? So I often ask the vendors, can we have a demo environment? And if you don't have one, without being cheeky, can you build one? Because we know that if you sit on a demo, like what we're doing today, and it's with a salesperson, no offense to salespeople, they'll show you a really, really good sandbox environment where everything loads super duper quick. And what you really want to know is, what does it look like when I do it through my internet? What does it look like when I use my client's information if I can, depending on the software? So yeah, the testing is also really important to stop
Yeah,
the whole
yeah,
magpie-ness.
absolutely, absolutely. Having
One other
worked,
thing as well. Sorry.
oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Our firm do two things that I'm not gonna lie, I don't particularly enjoy, but have to be done. We've got a ridiculously good data privacy team who vet things like crazy, and ironically, we've got some really good SEMA accountants who review vendors' finances. Like, it might seem obvious, but like when there's like app startups coming, like how are they backed? How much backing have they got? What's their burn rate, right? Like how much cash they're actually churning through. And that's how we select apps to actually partner with. So something might come on the market that looks amazing. I'm not gonna lie, we think it's really, really cool. But then we actually look at their accounts. I think it's been posted. We go, okay, the balance sheet looks a bit, you know, not as liquid as we hoped. Is that going to be a problem? And despite how shiny and amazing that app is, someone in our finance team might go, let's see how well they do in 6 months, because they look at the burn rate and go, they might not be here, or they might be bought up.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The longevity of the software itself
Hmm.
makes a lot of sense. And I have to admit, having worked in marketing in SaaS companies, it is our job to make everything look so shiny and perfect
Hmm.
and just right for you in sales and marketing. That's our job. So I love that really hands-on testing. It makes a huge difference. And even as a marketer, it's something that I looked at. When I choose marketing apps as well, is I can peek behind the curtain and know what the other marketers are doing and how they're positioning. So I think those
Can I
are,
add one more thing as well?
of
Sorry,
course,
as we're talking, my brain's flowing. This
I love
one's controversial, and you can quote me on this one. Why does your app stack suck? Don't listen to people like me, right? Listen to what I say and take it as advice, but like, do your own testing. Like I can't know about your business.
Yeah.
John Toon, Ryan Pierce, the other people who are in this space in the UK sector, the digital disruptors, they can't know about your practice, whether you're in a big firm or you're a one-man band, or it's you and a few partners. Like we can't know. It's always good to get advice from peers and colleagues, and I do it all the time. But ultimately, I know what the goal for Kreston Reeves is, and I need to know how that app selection is going to go. So don't listen to all the hype. Honestly,
Right.
take the hype with a pinch of salt.
Yeah. It's not one app stack to serve them all. It
No.
needs to vary. Yeah.
So in
Yeah.
summary, don't listen to me.
Well, we are listening to you about the strategies and how to understand if your app stack stinks and how to improve it, not about the apps specifically that need to go into it. Because I think that's a great point. That based on the size of the firm, the ways of working within the firm, the client base, like all of those things are going to dictate. I mean, even just the difference between being in the United States versus the UK makes a difference in
Mm-hmm.
which underlying ledger systems are most popular, what they connect to, all of those types of things. I'm learning the lingo. I'm learning
Mm-hmm.
all of these things right now and seeing how those things all come together. Um, so this is a good segue into kind of our third topic about evaluating and integrating apps effectively. So, I think we've really talked about a lot about how people can evaluate the new apps, doing the testing period, having kind of the committee that helps evaluate those things. Um, can we talk a little bit about like any other pitfalls around like redundant tools, integration issues, things like that that you see come up? How can firms help um, protect themselves against some of those pitfalls when Magpie um, lights up?
I guess the first thing that came to my mind when you asked me that was verifying whether the app or the developed software is native cloud. I'm not going to go too techy into that, but like there's different, when you say cloud, it can mean a lot of different things to different people depending on where they are in that chain, right? Like from like a service provider or server provider to probably regular users like you and me who go on a browser. And generally native cloud is, a software that has been developed with a browser in mind that you can access. Um, that's something really important to ask because it can help cut out some of the what I like to call faux cloud products where they have like a legacy product. It's been around for 25 years. It was designed for a desktop PC. They add a cloud layer onto it, and that's just patching a big wound with a plaster. It's not going to work. It's not. There's no longevity in it. So maybe verifying if they're a native cloud product is one of the ways to go. Um, Trying to think what else can you do to stop the magpie-ness. Is magpie-ness even a word?
It is
No,
now.
it is
We've
now. It is
invented
now.
words.
Um, Not to contradict what I have said, but again, keep your ear to the ground and um, ask other firms or practices. Because,
Mhm.
all right, granted, you've got to do your own research, but if 1,000 different accountants go, that app was terrible, it didn't do what it needed to do, there might be some truth to it. So, not to contradict what I just said, but still understand what people are saying about apps
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
services.
You need to learn from other people's experiences while also developing your own opinions. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things I like to keep in mind is a line that I heard from Dragon's Den or hear from Dragon's Den all the time. Is the business or service scalable and repeatable? So to prevent yourself from having like, change fatigue or magpie syndrome, ask yourself, the system I'm implementing it, can I see it working for 3 years as a minimum? Can I see it do that? Um, Forget about their product roadmap. Ignore that because that can change or not exist. If I've got a problem right now with the way I'm working and this software will be the solution to that problem. Will it be the solution for the next 3 or 4 years? Now, obviously, no one's got a crystal ball, but if you know that you've got certain forecasts in mind and you think the software is going to cost a certain amount, it's going to save amount of time or save money, then go for it. Just know that you're going to have it for at least 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. What about like integration issues? How do you overcome. Obviously, at the top of the webinar, we were talking about if people have to take Excel spreadsheets and move data from here to there, and I'm doing my CSV export and my CSV upload and those types of things. Obviously, like some of the integration things are designed to help that. Is there, how would you approach like looking at things like integration issues to help reduce those types of bottlenecks?
Do you mean like making sure that everything stitches together, or using a third-party service to stitch things together?
No, I mean either one, because I know that there are circumstances that could require either.
Okay, personal bias. I'm not a fan of low code, no code solutions. The reason being is they require some level of code, even if you are not the coder. And that means that they can sometimes drop off. I'm not going to name one of them or two of them or three of them, but like that's one of the issues. They do serve a purpose, and providing they're kept up to date, they work fine. But if they're not, they still require a level of coding, even if you as the user don't have to do the coding. So that's one solution I don't like. So I try and stay clear of that. That's more of a personal preference and a geeky thing. That's just me. But if it works for you, fill your boots. Um, sorry, what was the question again? I kind of waffled on that one.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Just how firms can approach and help mitigate like integration issues so that like the data is flowing through properly, they've got the right order of operations, and making sure that they connect properly. And in your case, like without a no code, low code tool set. Because I think, as marketers, again,
Mhm.
it's our job to say we have an integration with X. And is that integration like, yep, like a simple plug, like a headphone jack, or is this like a true integrated system with two-way data or whatever those things are?
Thank you. You pretty much answered it for me. So, what does the integration look like, right? You can make a very good point, and I can give some examples. There are some vendors out there that say they've got a Xero or a QuickBooks integration, and what the integration is literally just some kind of random time-based upload every 12th hour of the day. That's when the cron kicks in and it pushes the data to zero. That's not a live integration. It is an integration, but it's not a very good one. We've had some vendors that use Xero's API, for example, but because they are still a old school server based technology, again, they still need to push. It's not live. So we, on behalf of our clients, have had to get a Xero developer license and help build the API connection for that particular vendor, because they probably don't have the infrastructure to partner with Xero and create a full on native cloud app or app version of their software. So that's one thing to look at, is how does it actually integrate, and ask how it does. Like, get the vendor to show you, is it actually a live two-way integration backwards and forwards. Another thing, like lots of apps don't actually go back to Xero. Like lots of things push out of Xero but don't go back to Xero. I've noticed that. Or if I got the wrong way around, hold on. Yeah, not all of them have two-way.
Is how important is that? Is that usually pretty important? Does it depend on the software?
It depends on how the information is sent back to Xero. And I'll give an example. Card payment services, right? There are lots of them, and they will all do the card payment data back to Xero in different ways.
Mhm.
Neither of them is right or wrong. Some of them do like a daily take. Some of them do individual card transactions. Some of them have like a slight delay. And how that data goes into Xero and how you want it to go into chart of accounts can affect how you can do the books, or how you're going to maybe look at the accounts. And it's just important to know how that data is going back in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And again, going back to something that we talked about earlier in the webinar, we talked about bringing in a consultant, an expert in this area to help with like identifying the opportunities and things like that. Is that something that a consultant would also be able to help with, like identifying, I have this experience, I've integrated these apps. Is that an area where you could get kind of third party expertise on that, or is something that that the customer, the user has to really get from the vendor themselves?
Um, a bit of both. So I think it is a dedicated role. I would say that I'm very biased. But if you're someone who has genuine interest, or you're not in a large firm, you as the customer can ask a few simple questions to find out, what kind of iteration is going on. It's just it's a case of like adding the same rationale or critique that you would to a car purchase, right? If you're going to buy a car, there are things, measures and checks you would put in place to make sure you get the right car for you slash your family. And I think sometimes when it comes to business, we kind of, for some reason, we turn off that part of our brain when it comes to review and critique. But actually think about it as a long-term, somewhat expensive purchase, depending on how much you spend on a car, and how long you're going to get, how much use you're going to get out of that feature. So software, car analogy, very poor, I know, but hopefully it made sense. I'm going to purchase this. It's probably going to cost a bit of money. I'm probably going to be using it for a long, long time. How much mileage can I get out of it? And just make sure you have the same level of checks. What's the miles per gallon? Okay, how easy is it to use? How many doors does it have? Or how many users can I have on there? How many users are going to cost me? Things like that. How much data can I take in and out of the system? Do I have hard limits or soft limits on what I can do on transaction volumes? Things like that. Things that you would do if you were buying a car. You should do when you're buying software if you don't have an external consultant or someone within your firm or practice to do it for you.
Yeah, yeah. I actually really like that car analogy. I think it makes a lot of sense because I think most of us also purchase cars or lease cars, depending on our preferences, for a minimum of 3 years. Most people don't want to buy a new,
Hmm.
you might want to, but most people aren't getting a new car every year either.
No,
So I think that it works really well with that um 3-year window that you had brought up earlier too. Um, so do you have any strategies or tools that you have found really effective in helping people achieve like smooth integration between apps, especially in organizations that have really complex or multi-layered workflows?
it takes practice. I've got some horror stories, not going to share them today, of where like I've just, done integrations that hasn't quite gone right. Have the philosophy that it can be fixed. It's technology, right? Ultimately it's virtual, and there is a way to fix it. It might not be obvious, but there is a way. Where there's a will, there's a way, especially with software. And yeah, like I said, it comes down to practice and experience. Um, some vendors are really helpful when it comes to integrations, and they have their own integration teams. That's another thing that we look at when we're looking for partnerships or who we're going to work with. What value can they bring to the integration process? Um, yeah, it just honestly it comes down to practice. There's so many times I've done migrations that haven't gone quite right, or integrations that haven't gone quite right, and we may have lost money on it or the project as a firm, but at least the client's happy and they stay with us and we recover in the long run. Just don't be afraid to try it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people get scared about fintech and adding things in because they're scared they're gonna make a mistake. You probably will make a mistake, but it's how you learn from those mistakes. I know it sounds very cliche, but it's true. Just practice and doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there how much pre-work do you do before like setting up with some of those, like making some of those systems and things like that in terms of like documenting existing workflows, existing pain points and things like that, and then highlighting those places? How much kind of pre-work would you say goes into making sure that we're asking the right questions, of the vendors or of the consultants? To make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success.
Depends on the nature of the project and the scale of the project, and I'll explain. So with our internal app stack, we've got kind of 6 core apps that have been vetted over the last 2 or 3 years that we've slowly built up. So we've trained staff on. We've made a repository of knowledge on our intranet, and the idea being most people in our firm are qualified accountants and bookkeepers, and they haven't got time to know the intricacies of every single app, especially the ones we recommend. So they can literally go onto our internet and go, okay, look, someone's done this testing for us. Use Expensify, use Spendesk, use Dext expenses for client type XYZ, and use so and so for ABC, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we do it. And I realized I waffled again. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, just we were talking a little bit about like the pre-work that needs to happen in
Yeah,
order to help, especially in kind of those complex places to understand like what the requirements are or what how to make sure that like those integrations are available and going to work properly.
thank you for the reminder. So the pre-work again, so the other side of the spectrum is where we're not dealing with maybe off-the-shelf products or SME clients that we have a stack that we've already recommended. There's a lot of work that goes into the pre-scoping or scoping sessions. So if it's a larger client that has more complex needs and I'm doing work for them, I would say 50 to 60% of my fee is done on scoping, which I mean by either going to their offices and asking relevant people or stakeholders how they work. If it's a warehouse, from the warehouse foreman to the packaging manager, right up to the finance team and the CEO, like spending a day or two in their offices and actually asking them and documenting every process. Sometimes I'll use something like Miro, which is a system you can use online for post-it notes, or sometimes I use physical post-it notes, and literally I'll do that, and it might be, I don't know, 3 meters long worth of post-it notes on that process and making sure it's documented and then put in, and that's a lot of work. So when it comes to more complex systems, a lot of the work should be done in the early stages, where things fall over, especially for bigger businesses or businesses with more processes where people don't do the scoping properly, and then they get a quarter way through, start implement something, go, well, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, and that's when things stall, and people get annoyed because the basic things their old system used to do, the new system can't, or they don't know how new things work in the new system. So to answer your question, lots of time goes into review.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I love the fact that you also go and talk to the people who are actually using the systems. Um, I know I have seen circumstances in which the way senior management thinks something gets done and the way that things actually get done
Hmm.
in the business aren't the same. They don't necessarily line up. Going in and talking to the people who are doing the work, who are living it on a day-to-day basis, I think it really helps identify those opportunities.
I can give an example, one that you might be able to relate to. Okay, so I worked with some SMEs where the owner was like, Salesforce, it's amazing. They're not wrong. It's an amazing tool. But you and I probably both know it was never designed for really, really small businesses. So they will spend money on a Salesforce license and they'll go, 20 grand to implement. Nah, that's ridiculous. I don't need that. And then they'll plonk it in. And Salesforce does require some configuration depending on what you need to do.
Oh,
And they
yeah.
think they're saving money. And then they don't get the reports they need. Going back to my original example, the sales team don't want to put data in because it's really manual. It didn't have to be, but it is. And they go, oh, Salesforce is rubbish. It's really expensive. Because they did pay a pretty penny for the licenses, but they didn't pay for the implementation. They didn't scan it up, uh, scope it properly. So they think Salesforce is a terrible tool. And had they done the research, they'd have realized that one, is probably not aimed at their business type anyway in terms of scale or kind of regional locality or whatever they do. And two, it could have worked for their business, but they don't want to spend the time making it work for their business.
Right. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Having worked in the Salesforce ecosystem, I have I have seen that. I have
Hmm.
experienced that. And
I've seen it often.
I think it's true on so many levels. Small businesses that will just go and buy a QuickBooks or a Xero because, well, I have to do my taxes or I'm going to start doing payroll or something like that. And if they don't have a trusted financial advisor yet, then they have even the same situations there where QuickBooks or Xero may be a great tool. Obviously, they're
Hmm.
um, billions of dollars invested, whole careers built on these tools. There's not something wrong with them, but if you're not set up to use them properly, then it's not necessarily the right tool for you.
100%.
Um, All right, so kind of our fourth topic for today, and this is kind of wrapping up to the end. So just as a reminder for our attendees, if you guys do have questions for Dayle, you can pop them in the chat or in the Q&A. And this goes back to something we talked about earlier in the webinar too. I love it when things come full circle. And this is really about that concept of staying up to date without disrupting people's workflows. So we know technology is changing rapidly, whether it's innovations within apps that are already in your app stacks, all the new apps that you're getting in your weekly digest of what's new in the Zero App Store, things like that. So staying up to date on all of that stuff can be really overwhelming. So what other tips do you have beyond like your digital heroes and things like that, where firms can stay up to date on things without the constant disruption?
Okay. This one might sound like a tenuous link, but bear with me. So I used to run on the philosophy of Moore's law. It comes from Gordon Moore. He was one of the founders of Intel, right? And he basically said that the power of processing for CPUs will double or be exponential every year for the next 40, 50 years. And he was right. Every year, CPU power and speed and cost, or sorry, power doubled and cost went down. And the reason why I used to use that rule, I still kind of, it's been somewhat debunked, but the reason why I do it is because software is always limited by the ability of hardware. Like I can have an idea and I can design a piece of software, but if there's no computing power to run that software, it just won't exist. So what you'll find, traditionally speaking, it's a little bit different now, is development cycles or innovation cycles would happen when the latest piece of hardware come out because the developers will be like, oh, I've now got more RAM, more CPU, more power to play with to change my database. Again, it's not quite the same anymore, but you will find um, general leaps in advancement for technology still happen in 2 year cycles. So if you have signed up with a vendor that does X, Y, Z for you, just enjoy it for 2 years. 3 months time, something might come out, and it might be a competitor. I'm not saying ignore it, be aware of it. It's there, but just don't spend hours researching this thing. Just wait 2 years. Very rarely do we see some amazing leap or bound, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, by the way, by anyone who's watching or watching this later. Within a space of 2 years, it doesn't happen often.
Well, that's a great rule. It kind of goes back to your will it last for 3 years. And I guess the way you soothe your magpie is by signing up for their updates, keeping an eye on what's happening in the firm, in the with those new areas, and then
Yeah, and there's also like
evaluate.
different groups out there that like well, I'm going to plug you guys a little bit. App Venture, right? The idea of App Venture is really simple. You sign up, and you can kind of see some of the changes. You can see some of the updates. You guys have done the hard work for most of us. Just sign up to a newsletter, or there's lots of Zero have a Zero magazine where they'll talk about different apps. QuickBooks have got their own newsletters. They'll tell you about the apps and the product developments that are happening for their ecosystem. Just sign up to that and have a quick glance. 20 minutes. Skim it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, having advisors, like you talked about, if you can develop a relationship with an advisor, let the advisor come and tell you which apps you should be paying attention to if you've
Hmm.
developed that type of relationship as well. Um, so I think we've talked about it a little bit, but just kind of to round it out, in terms of when companies are going through that change management and they're going through that process that we talked about earlier, do you have any specific strategies that you recommend for helping create that change without too much disruption in day-to-day workflows or overwhelming the staff, beyond what we've already kind of talked about with small steps often?
Uh, don't be a dick. No one likes someone who's a dick. Be nice to people. Sorry, that was a bit of a cliche and a bit of a non-answer. So strategies. I think it's a good idea to have some kind of project management training or skill set. I'm not saying you've got to be like Prince 2 certified or qualified. That's a qualification in project management. But if you were to go on a day course on project management, just understanding the different roles that happen with change management, where you've got stakeholders, where you've got the project manager, where you've got influencers, just being aware of those different roles and the things that you would have to do, forecasting on a budget or creating a budget or creating a timeline or using a Gantt chart, little things like that. You can use something like Udemy and go on a course of project management. I'm not saying you're going to be an expert, but you'll just have an idea of what's happening when you're trying to implement a new system or a new way of working.
Right, right. And I think going back to your don't be a dick comment, it's kind of also understanding the human side of those things, that change can be hard, understanding where people are coming from when they're hesitant on those things,
Yep.
and that type of.
And sorry, interrupting you. So always have some kind of metric for success.
Oh, perfect.
Whether it's a long-term goal or a short-term one, next quarter we want to have 10 new people on the system, or by the end of the year, one of 100 new tax returns done by this process. Like, have it and measure it frequent, not overly frequently, but maybe once a month, depending on what the scales are, so you can actually see how you're doing, what progress am I making. Because if you can't measure the progress, either people won't get hyped about what's happening, or you won't know where you're at, and it just becomes a bit of a wishy-washy. We kind of changed this, we kind of did that, we don't know how it did. Have a metric. It doesn't have to be super hard, it doesn't have to be super tough to calculate, but just have some kind of goal where you can count it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things have changed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that's really important. I think it's something that gets overlooked sometimes, where when something is set up, it's implemented, like check, that's done. Now I'm ready to move on to the next thing and not going back and measuring like, is it being used? Is it achieving its goals? Those types of things. Because we all have
Hmm.
the never-ending list of opportunities to innovate, new tools to bring in, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so Dale, we're almost at the end of our time. Is there anything else that you would say to people about understanding why their app stack stinks, how to handle change management, how to improve things in their organization? Is there anything we haven't touched on that you think is important for people?
Make sure your vendor relationships are good. Be honest with the account managers or salespeople you're dealing with. Say, look, if we're not ready for your product, it's going to take some time. Don't fob them off. Just be really honest. We don't have time to look at this our project right now. We're doing these three projects. Um, and maybe even share your personal or firm-wide goals, because a good account manager or salesperson will go, I think this fits this goal, and they'll help you get there. And if they're good salespeople and their product doesn't help you with those goals at this time, they'll leave you alone. And by having that good relationship, you end up getting, I know, better deals with that vendor, or they might be able to give you more support. So just make sure you're clear. Yeah, to answer the question, your app stack can suck sometimes if you're not decent with vendors. They don't want to work with people who are annoying, like you don't want to work with people who are annoying. Be nice to
Right.
vendors.
Right, absolutely. And so just getting all of those drinks is not having the right relationship.
No, it's not. You just, be a little bit personal, be a little bit honest, but like, look, I have this particular goal. This goal ties into this for the firm. Can it help me do that? And if they say no, they will probably leave you alone. Um, if it's yes, then they'll think of a way to help you with that goal. Just be fair. I even ask vendors what their goals are. I sometimes ask some of the salespeople that approach me, "What's your target?" I know it's a very rude question to ask a salesperson, but it's good to know. How
Yeah.
can I help them achieve their target?
Yeah, well, one of my favorite quotes that I use too frequently is that the rising tide lifts all boats. So if we're all clear and transparent on what our goals are, that's how we can all help one another and we all get kind of better together with.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. Well, Dayle, thank you so much for this. It has been so fun chatting with you about this stuff today. I didn't see any questions come in, so I guess we've answered everyone's questions. But if after the webinar people do have questions, you can reach out to us via Appventory. We can get them to Dayle, or you can find Dayle on LinkedIn. Thanks so much, everyone, for your time today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dayle. Bye.